Drilling down to the custom application which was built, basically they were part of legal entity cases, they were data file cases and tax alert cases, which combined would come up on a dashboard, would come up to report on total number of filings per jurisdiction, per client name, per regime and tax year, and also breakdown of each of those filings with the statuses which they were in. Basically, additional functionalities was built in terms of legal entity bulk upload, which would take up from the client in a standard format which was already published on the service published code. You attach the file, you load up the data, and you come up with a list of error handlings which would check for each and individual attributes which would come up within the data set. And if there is any error with the legal entity errors, it would give them a list of very user intuitive interface to tell them what data is wrong, which attribute is incorrect, and they would go ahead and correct them and load that data across. Once the legal entity cases were loaded, you would have a list of all the legal entity cases which were loaded into the system. You could drill down to each one of those legal entity cases, in one of those workflow states based on the process which was designed at the backend. It would flow through the workflow from pending data to once the data is received, it ties up to the data file case. Then you generate a report which would be a combination of attributes from the legal entity as well as the data file case, which would then utilize to generate the report beyond ServiceNow. Once the generated, the approvals were driven through the reports, so on and so forth. The user interface customized for each one of the roles which were for the GTRS application. Basically, client would have a dashboard view, would have in terms of what information they would need to see on report on. They would have a view of approving all of those reports which were pending for their approval, review them, and provide feedback if there is anything which needs to be changed, and that feedback would be incorporated. The operations team would have access to load data, review the data, create reports out of it, update the information, pass it on for review for internal EY engagement managers. Then once the review is completed, it would be forwarded on to submission, wherein appropriate approvals would be received from the clients, whether they would submit it, whether EY would submit it based on the rules which were set up at the backend. Due to that, we had a lot of complex workflows running behind on each of those applications. And once the workflow is completed, all the legal entity cases would hit the completed state, and you would have associated reports which would be utilized in terms of reporting and dashboarding.